Across the United States, it's Black History Month. The theme for this year is Black Resistance. And today, we're coming to you from the premises of the National Council for Negro Women to have a chat with the President and CEO of the organization, Shavon Arline-Bradley. We're going to have a conversation on a wide range of topics from where the African Americans stand in the United States today, their mission and advocacy for women of African descent, their families and communities, to environmental justice, and of course, increased calls for police reform in this country. I am Ignatius Annor, so join me.
So we call this the corridor of power. And the corridor of power is significant because those two main structures that you spoke of, the Capitol and the White House, is really where the power structure leads in our democracy in the United States. Now, the same democracy that has been responsible for the atrocities we call slavery and those policies that were passed that really oppressed Black Americans in this country. But for us to be in a building that had a burned mortgage by Dr. Dorothy Irene Height, she had celebrities like Oprah Winfrey to support us in ensuring that this building was secured. But by doing so, it means that we are resilient people, that we have a place in history. This actual building is also a part of the National Registry of History. So this is an actual building that is listed as a historical site in this city. And what we want to highlight about being at 633 is that this is the place that is also heading down towards the African American Museum. So there's so much connection to this actual physical space, but even more so, the significance of Black women in power.
Thank you so much, Shavon. Let's delve into your work for women of African descent,
yes,
their families and their communities, particularly at a time like this where the country is celebrating Black History Month.
So I think there's a lot of misconceptions about understanding what we say when we mean women of African descent.
Right.
And as someone who understands the context for the diaspora, for NCNW, many don't know that we were the first Black organization actually as an NGO at the United Nations. And so this opportunity to be named as an NGO, a non-governmental organization that had status at the UN, it meant that we had interface with women across the globe. But there's a special affinity for women of African descent, and particularly women that represent the continent, because for African American women and African women, there is a connection. We don't always talk about it, we don't always engage in it, but the NCNW has been committed to it. We focus on issues like access to hygiene products, for opportunities for women in business, where we have entrepreneurs that are able to engage in other countries. Dorothy Height was one of the first women that actually traveled to Ghana, to Kenya, to be able to engage in support missions around healthcare for women, women who are having children. So there has been a historical alignment between NCNW and women of African descent, but I'm here to tell you there's a new commitment. We are now preparing ourselves for the International Day for Women. We are preparing ourselves to re-engage on the UN. And one of our major focuses is around clean water, an issue that crosses not only United States lines, but also lines as we think about our sisters on the continent of Africa.
But what role, for instance, do we see Black women playing as far as those issues are concerned? And I'll tie that in to what you're doing on environmental justice. That's also a huge concern for the community.
I will tell you this. Environmental justice is becoming one of the most pressing civil rights issues of our time. As we're thinking about climate change, as we're thinking about the presence of coal plants and plants on land where African Americans reside, thinking about clean air, thinking about clean water, Flint, Michigan, Jackson, Mississippi. These are primary issues that have really begun to take hold of our communities. We've seen correlations with cancer diagnoses. We've seen correlations with other health challenges and disparities that's been connected to the environment and to clean air and clean water access. And we see similar instances to women who are living in Africa. And so NCNW right now is redefining our lens around environmental justice and beginning to look forward to new partnerships that allow us to begin to not only address these issues, but here's the most important part, the policy. What policies are in place? how do we look at systems changing? When we say systems change, we mean engaging this corridor of power. We mean going to Congress. We mean understanding pieces of legislation that provides opportunities for investments and allocations to these issues from national, state, and local levels.
This is something that I believe would have impact on women, in particular on the African continent. Now, the continent of 54 nations contributes the very least to climate change, but continues to bear the brunt of that. Just last year in November in Sharm el-Sheikh, there was a conference, and the historic Loss and Damage Fund was finally, established, a cause that analysts have been making for decades. How is this work and the policies that you're championing going to have, a trickle-down effect?
Yeah, I think part of our work is to begin to reinstate engagement with sisters from the continent. One of the things that we have are affiliate organizations. We have 33 affiliate organizations, and many of those organizations have chapters actually on the continent. So I think about organizations like Alpha Kappa Alpha, like Delta Sigma Theta, organizations like the Links who engage heavily with sisters that are on the continent. We're going to be partnering to be able to identify ways to push these policies. Now, the United Nations is one of those safer ways. We do have the opportunity to also interface with leaders on the continent. Our goal is to be able to interface with and identify those presidents, those prime ministers that engage in our country, to begin to talk about ways that we can partner to engage on those policy changes.
Thank you. So let's move on from that and come to one key issue at this time that have come up again because of the tragedy that happened in Memphis, Tennessee last month. We saw the beating of a 29-year-old African-American, a black man for that matter, who was beaten and 3 days later died at the hospital. It's ignited, as I said, calls for police reforms. Black History Month is the month of February. Is there a need to ramp up pressure on the powers that be?
Yeah, so ramping up pressure is an understatement. I want to give the nuance. A black man was murdered by other black men who represent a system that has been intentionally, in some cases, and sometimes unconsciously, creating unhealthy, unsafe practices for what we call these stops. So there's traffic stops that have been happening across the country, and there's been a consistent pattern that traffic stops have led to either harm or death of the victim. And I will tell you, I want to address the elephant in the room for us. And that is, when you have black men that are a part of this process, what we realize is that systemically, black lives continue to lose their value. So it doesn't matter who's perpetrating. What matters is the result. And that is the victims of these types of experiences have been black Americans. Black men and black women have lost their lives at the hands of police. NCNW is not here to say that all police are operating this way. That is not the case. But the system, the criminal justice system, as we look at police reform, we're looking for, one, the George Floyd Policing and Justice Act. I want to be clear about this act. We had an opportunity to pass it, and it has not been passed. So as NCNW is advocating, we are going to turn up the heat and the pressure to consider how legislators are clear on how this affects black women and their families. And you say these are black men that are dying, and I'm saying these black men have black mothers. And I'm saying that we are mothers, aunts, sisters of these victims, and we are prepared to take this conversation to the highest levels.
The theme for the celebration this month is Black resistance. It brings me to the next question. As a black woman in America today, what are you most proud of? What are you not proud of in the U.S.?
I'm most proud of the resilience of our people. We come from a lineage of women and men who were slaves, who have now seen the highest levels of government and have governed at the highest level. What I'm most concerned about, quite frankly, is that those accomplishments did not address the real sin of our country, and that is the racism that really has been entrenched in the way that we operate as a United States. What do I mean by that? I mean white supremacist culture, white nationalism are systemic experiences. And many people think that when we say those words, we mean white people. What we mean is white supremacist culture, culture that says that persons of color are not only devalued, but are treated differently regardless of any situation they're in.
Shavon, what gives you hope as president of the National Council for Negro Women?
What gives me hope are young people. I'm a mother. I have an 8-year-old son and a 22-year-old bonus daughter. So I have a college graduate and a third grader. The hope is that they know who they are, and that NCNW is a part of the lineage of civil rights organizations that has been responsible for not only building on this issue of black resilience and black leadership, but black political power, black advocacy, and the idea of black leadership. That gives me hope. It gives me hope to see a generation that will not tolerate what happened before. But I'll tell you what scares me, even as I'm saying that with hope, I think about all of this intentional erasure of black history in our country. I suspect that we're going to see more engagement from intergenerational work. And that's where NCNW comes in. We're the organization that meets all generations at one table and begin to hash out these issues. So I'm hopeful because we still have voice, we still have fight, and we have a blueprint on how to fight for these issues.
Shavon Arline-Bradley, thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you.
All right then, have a good one.
Thank you so much.